did the introduction at the beginning, right?
Hi there, everyone. Welcome. My name is Mira Shaw, and I'm here with Rob MacDonald, my partner here at Trey Education, and we're excited
Hello.
to bring you
One second.
this Q&A session with Eric and Tim, who in just a moment I'm going to spotlight for everyone once we get going and maybe don't need to see everybody's face. So I'm going to go ahead and quick share my screen and invite you all to just get a little bit oriented to the plan for the next 45 minutes. So let me go ahead and pull that up. All right. Actually, I think my main job at this point is to hand it over to Rob. So I'll just say thanks everyone for coming. We're going to keep letting people in from the waiting room. And Rob, go ahead and share with us what we need to know.
All right. So we'll start out with a little bit of housekeeping. Just thank you to everyone who registered. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions. I have done my best to try to compile your questions into a manageable list for 45 minutes. Pull out the big themes. Try to make sure we're addressing the needs that you expressed there. We have got Mira did some spotlighting there. We've got people other than the panelists muted, but the chat is open. So if you want to share resources, share ideas with other attendees, please feel free. And some people are not here right now, but we know that May is a busy time, and some people have said, I'm excited to watch the recording. So thanks to those of you who are watching this recording in the future. All right, let's dive into our panelists today. We've got Eric Hudson, Tim Requarth. Eric is the author of Learning on Purpose on Substack, and Tim, the author of The Third Hemisphere on Substack. If you are not already subscribed to both of them, what are you thinking? So much amazing content, so many great resources, some of my favorite stuff to read on a regular basis. So really excited to hear from both Eric and Tim about some of the questions that you posed. We'll dive right in. So one of the things that came up from lots of you was questions about this sort of growing wave of anti-tech sentiment. Some of that is explicitly AI, but we've got schools going back to paper and pencil. We've got cell phone bans. We've got lots of anger about what's going on with social media and backlash against that. So in the midst of all of that, how should schools be responding and thinking about AI when there's all this anti-tech sentiment out there? And even, what are your thoughts about a school that says we're going to position ourselves as a low-tech, maybe even AI-free school? So Eric, I'll let you get started. And what are your thoughts on that stuff?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for spending the time today. If you are a low-tech school, you are an AI school. I think let's start by just naming that this technology is increasingly embedded in all forms of technology. If you're a tech-free school, that's a different conversation, right? But I work with a lot of schools, and I don't think I've met a single one that's interested in going tech-free, which I think means that you need to engage with AI. And I think it's really important that you hold on to your skepticism and that you are critical of this technology, even if you're an enthusiast. This is a very complex, non-neutral technology that covers a really wide span of applications. I think we've gotten to this place where AI is ChatGPT or large language models, but that's not the case. And so I think that it's really important that you engage and learn about and bring your skepticism into your interactions with it. And that any approach to AI should reflect the same approach you would take to any technology, which is, what do we know about how relevant or applicable this is to learning? And how do we ensure that our students are having learning experiences where they can authentically demonstrate what they know and are able to do? And then from there, you can talk about sort of tech integration. But I think it's really challenging. I know that it's a challenging environment around technology right now, but I think it's very, very hard to kind of separate AI from some of these other tech conversations happening right now.
Nice, thanks. Tim, what are your thoughts there?
Just want to make sure you can hear me. Is that coming through? Okay, good.
Yes.
I'm having a technical issue, so I had to, the speakers coming through my computer. So just let me know if there's any issues. Again, wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me. I would echo what Eric has said, which is, to one, not lump all technologies together. As you said, AI can mean a lot of different things. And even within the same technologies, if we talk about generative AI or ChatGPT, they can come in very different forms and can be delivered in very different ways. And so to bundle them all together is maybe, not the fairest assessment, nor what's going to serve students and teachers. The second thing that I will add to what Eric said is we are in this current backlash of educational technology, social media more broadly. It's not, it can be a bit inchoate at times, but there's a real feeling there, I think, among parents and many other people. And there's a lot of evidence that things have, if not actively caused harm, have maybe failed to live up to their promises. So I think we should acknowledge that some of this is justified. And, that has to be, that has to be a part of this conversation. But we also don't want to get stuck fighting the last war. And so I think that with AI, there are some risks that carry forward, and there are others that do not.
I mean, I appreciate that you're both giving a thoughtful, nuanced answer there. And that includes acknowledging valid concerns. A bunch of the questions that people submitted involve stories about both students and teachers who are reluctant to use AI. And I think you're both making a case for, not just having a knee-jerk reaction to this, but being thoughtful about how any technology is used. Am I hearing that right?
I mean, I do, yes. I mean, I think, if we take a step back, if a person may have moral or political concerns about this technology, they could be justified in having a very strong response against it on those grounds alone. But if we're just thinking about it outcome-wise or instrument, is it useful? Is it harmful? Is it helpful? If we think about it in that sense, then I think a nuanced view is merited. But I just want to acknowledge that I think there are many reasons that one could be opposed to this technology that have nothing to do with its capabilities or possible advantages.
Thanks. Nice. All right. Then I think we'll shift into a little bit of sort of talking about curriculum. There are some questions that we got that were coming at AI from this angle that students need a really strong foundation first. And that means content knowledge in lots of cases. And then other comments, people saying AI is so disruptive that it's changing which content and which skills students really are going to need in the future. So I'd love to hear from both of you about your thoughts about how the curriculum might need to evolve. Are there things that we should be holding on to tightly? Are there things in the current sort of core curriculum that might be okay to let go of? And yeah, Tim, how about do you want to start on this one?
Sure. I mean, I'll take a step back. I agree that this is a disruptive technology. But I disagree it has to be disruptive at all levels and for all students. I am not sure, for example, that, how much benefit there is for teaching a second grader much about AI. And there may be a tremendous benefit in shielding them completely from it until a later age. I agree it gets more complicated with older students. I'm primarily in in fact, in higher education, and it's very complicated there. These are adults, and there's much less control over the environment, both at school and at home. And so there's some different considerations at play. But as you get younger, I'm not sure that there really needs to be a big AI plan, other than I am not sure how necessary it is. Because I think in the end, and you all will probably know this much better than me, but if we think about this cognitively, especially in these younger years, you're not, in my view, you're not really training them to learn very specific, pieces of content, and it's about forming minds to be able to reason, to handle complex ideas, to actually tolerate difficulty, to understand what motivates them, right? To understand how they can be motivated. For the same reason that just because there are, cars, the world is filled with cars, we don't say, oh, well, we should teach, 10-year-olds how to drive, or we shouldn't exercise anymore because now there's cars, right? I feel like it's the similar analogy to AI. Just because AI can do X and Y cognitive or relational thing does not mean that it's something that should be leaned into for the vast majority of education, which serves a very different purpose.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I would point people towards a set of recommendations that was put out by the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction that kind of scoped and sequenced how they view the role that this technology should and should not play at different levels of education. And just to back what Tim said, like the state does not want to see direct use of generative AI tools in elementary classrooms. Like that's very clear in those recommendations. They do want to see conversations with kids that builds young children's awareness of this technology's presence in their lives. And that's the state, North Carolina, kind of being responsive to the idea that generative AI is in toys and games designed for the youngest students. And so I do think there's one question, which is what is the school's responsibility in terms of engaging with the present reality, which is this technology is increasingly unavoidable in the day-to-day lives of students of all ages. What responsibility does a school see in terms of engaging that? In terms of your question, I mean, I think there's just a real goals and tasks conversation that needs to be happening, especially in high school and higher education right now, which is, I think a lot of the goals that we have held sacred in schools for a very long time still deeply matter, probably matter more now because of AI. Skills like critical thinking, discernment, self-awareness, self-regulation, creativity, composition. The problem is that a lot of the tasks that we have been accustomed to asking students to do to show us that they're meeting those goals are no longer reliable proxies for learning because of AI. So like the take-home essay is a really good example of a task that we have long relied on for students to demonstrate to us that they're meeting certain skills-based goals, right? And the take-home essay, the design of that task really needs to change or be transformed if we want to be responsive to this technology. And so I think I don't want to throw kind of the baby out with the bathwater here. I think a lot of the skills that really matter in school still deeply matter. I think where there's sort of where adaptation is sort of increasingly becoming non-negotiable is just learning how to identify which tasks we ask students to do that are like just really made completely vulnerable or unreliable because of this technology, and focus on what needs to change about those things, what needs to be adapted or transformed.
And I mean, this for both of you, but do you see a future in which the tasks are more explicitly connected to those human skills, creativity, collaboration, empathy, etc.? If you looked at typical tasks in the K through 12 world, it would feel a little bit artificial to connect them to those more human skills. So I wonder if you can envision a future where those tasks, those assignments, those assessments are more clearly linked to those high-level human qualities.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has to do with what Eric's saying about really reasserting a vision of what the goals and the values are for education, and then slowly moving towards what tasks will enable students to realize those goals and allow teachers to assess them. I will just, it is not fair that all of us have to all of a sudden rethink this, right? I just want to acknowledge that this no, this threw a complete wrench into education, and we're everybody's scrambling to figure this out. Were there problems with the take-home essay? Yes. I mean, that was known for years. This isn't news. It's not like AI, it was always an imperfect vehicle for many reasons. But AI has made it now an untenable one, just to give that. But it offers a moment, and maybe we didn't ask for this, but it offers a moment to reflect on what was valuable about the take-home essay. What do we care about? What changes did we want to occur in the student as they struggled through that assignment? And how can we replicate those changes that we value in the student through another means? It's a lot of work that we didn't ask for, but I think Eric's exactly right. It requires asserting what we cared about in the first place about the take-home essay and how we can rebuild from that place.
Yeah, I just go back to it's very hard to say, oh, these are the human skills that are going to matter 10 years from now or whatever, right? I just think I think prediction is a very dangerous game when it comes to AI in education. And so I would much rather deal with the present reality, which is we know that a lot of our assessment methodologies are not working. We know that a lot of students are using this technology frequently and often without adult guidance. And we also know that where our expertise lies as educators is probably more in designing learning and less in policing and monitoring AI use, right? And so I completely agree with Tim, nobody asked for this. And that kind of is the foundation for the worst possible conditions for change, right? But at the same time, we have agency as educators in how we choose to respond. And I would really encourage schools to lean into what is within our locus of control right now when so much feels outside of our locus of control. And I think there are things that we have agency over, even despite everything that's going on right now.
Well, that ties beautifully into this next question. You've done some writing, Eric, about hoping to see students invested in the process, not just focused on generating a product. And teachers do have some control over what those tasks are, what those assessments look like. Would love to hear you talk a little bit about what a classroom might look like if the focus is much more heavily on the learning process than the product that's generating the grade.
Yeah, I'll sort of echo what Tim said. I think this is more of a high school, middle school conversation than it is an elementary conversation. But I think it goes back to assessment. What is the purpose of assessment? The purpose of assessment is to elicit evidence of learning that helps the student and the teacher understand what has been learned and what they need to do next, right? A lot of the products we've asked students to generate as a window into their process can now be generated pretty competently by AI. And so the things that we need to make visible are now process elements, not products. We need a more clear, transparent window into what a student does as they're going through the changes that Tim mentioned earlier, right? And so that could look like so many different things, but I'll lean into Ron Richards' work on visible thinking and the idea that there's actual research-based, not tech-free protocols that we can use with students in class to get them to show us how they are working through a thought or working through organizing content or working through reflecting on something. And those things are a window into how a student is learning. And those also, from a real practical perspective, create a more reliable paper trail from the beginning of the process to the product. Teachers who have been engaging with process-oriented assessment for a long time can tell you that they feel much more confident assessing the product because they have documentation and narration of the reflection from the student throughout the process. So I think it's just a matter of like, where do we want to focus our time and energy in terms of getting students to show us what they're thinking? And how do we want to kind of recalibrate that assessment process to weight and prioritize that process more than sort of just like waiting for the product to arrive for us to be able to say, oh, this student has learned. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think there's got to be that shift in focus is really important.
Tim, anything you want to add in that realm?
No, other than, that will run up against the very real constraint of teacher and educator bandwidth. And, not only to just redesign, but often process oriented assessments. And I mean, they by definition often require a lot more touch points. And so, this is something that I think has to be wrestled with at a level above individual educators, which is how do we incentivize and make space for the kinds of change that need to happen. And again, to look at this as an opportunity to say, what was it that wasn't actually optimal about the assignments that we were kind of doing anyway? How do we make space for people to, as Eric says, exert their agency as educators and redesign and rethink? Because right now, it feels like it's kind of every person on their own. There's a little bit of guidance. There's a like, don't do this, but I don't have an answer to this question, but I do think that without the proper institutional incentives and forces, it's going to be very difficult to make the best of this situation.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think this is where visioning and strategy from school leadership really matters because that dictates investment of resources, right? So for example, if the AI question you're organizing your institution around is, what do we do about AI? Then you might be spending time and money investing in bringing an AI platform into your school that you're hoping teachers use with students, right? If the organizing question is, what should we do about assessment because of AI? Then you're investing resources in professional development, right?
Yeah.
And like, I think that strategic choice is really important, right? Because if you see AI as a technology problem, you're going to pile more technology into the classroom, right? Which is, we know from, it has been well documented, does not always go well, right? If you see AI as a learning design problem, then you need to invest in your human resources. You need to invest in your people. And that is time, and that is compensation, and that is sort of support. And that is, whatever we can get in the weeds if you want to. But I do think that sort of institutional visioning and direction setting is really critical. And the clarity of it is really important too.
Eric, that is just such a good point. I was reading over New York City Public Schools AI playbook today, and they have a 10-step vendor procurement plan. And the amount of space they put into human resource development it pales in compare. It's a technical document. And I think that it's in its draft phase right now, but I think that what you said hits the nail on the head. They're looking at this as a technical issue and pouring technical resources into it. And that is just that vacuum is going to be filled by promises from vendors, probably. And that's what I think it's an opportunity to invest in teachers. So I would hope to see that.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, I mean, I've been through sort of several cycles of disruptive change in education, right? And I think if you look at the research around like what are the sort of innovations in education that have worked or not worked or whatever, if you read those studies, I mean, the pivot point is always the teacher. Like, how well trained and how committed is the teacher to implementing this innovation? And so I just, I think this is a moment to really invest in the people and sort of avoid overinvestment in the technology. I mean, you should be providing your people with a safe, high quality tool if that's what you want to do. Like, let's not sort of, again, throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I do think the institutional prioritization of what really matters needs to be clearly stated.
And I'll just add really quickly that if you're investing in the teachers who are updating those tasks, those assessments, inevitably you should be getting more engagement from students who are really buying into the learning process instead of feeling like they're just playing the game of school day after day. So yeah, I just want to mention the student side of the student payoff when you invest in teachers in thoughtful ways. Shift a little bit, Tim, you have talked about how historically there are these examples of us saying, oh, this technology is going to free up time for people to do other things. But you've also been able to point to examples of how the way those examples have played out, people have not always been able to put that free time into the things that feel like they matter most. And we're hearing that same sort of conversation about AI. Oh, all this efficiency is going to free up time to focus on other things. What are your thoughts about what schools have to do to make sure that if there really is increased efficiency, that free time is devoted to the things that we really care about?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think it's been a central pitch from Silicon Valley from multiple leaders that AI or whatever latest technology will free you up for what matters. We can challenge this on two grounds. One ground is that it actually saves time or makes you more efficient. I mean, at this point, there was a real question, but at this point, there's a lot of data now. And so we can say places where AI makes people more efficient and where it doesn't. And then you also have to look at the second order. Even if it does make people more efficient individually, does it make organizations more efficient at what they do? And sometimes those can point in opposite directions. Because if many people are using AI to be more efficient, it can often just create more work or create different sets of tasks that get absorbed by other people, and organizationally you don't really see any efficiency gains. And so this has been studied at this point. And so I think that it's more nuanced. And so first of all, we shouldn't say automatically that AI, the latest generation of AI makes things more efficient. But even if it did, as you said, there's a second question, which is what happens with that time? And in order for your extra time to go towards what you want it to, the system has to allow you to do that or encourage you to do that. And if it does not, you're going to do what the system does. So if an AI makes a doctor faster, does that mean the doctor is going to spend an hour with each patient instead of 10 minutes? Or does that mean the doctor is going to see twice as many patients? What does the system tell you to do? It says the doctor's probably going to see more patients, and you're already starting to see this data with doctors when they use AI. If AI makes lesson planning faster for some reason, where is that time going to go? Right? I mean, I think that's the question, right? What would it incentivize teachers to do instead? And just like with many doctors, teachers are already quite overworked. They have a lot of extra burdens that they're going to be doing. They may be filled up with additional administrative requirements. Like, is there going to be time? Is it going to be okay? Is it going to be for the school? Is it going to say it's okay for you to actually spend more time with one-on-one meetings with students or whatever it is that you might want to do? So there has to be an option for teachers to decide, or for systems to decide what matters and actively, intentionally direct the energy in that direction, because otherwise it's just going to get filled up with whatever it is the system incentivizes.
I couldn't agree more. And the only thing I would add is just like that specific, what Tim just brought up, this question of trade-offs is a very good, very concrete activity for leadership teams to engage in. So if we believe that AI can do X, accelerate lesson planning for teachers, what is gained and what is lost by encouraging that? And, the case I would bring up, just because, I don't want to leave students out of this conversation, is teachers using AI for feedback and grading. What is gained and what is lost by encouraging that? And there's not just, efficiency or operational considerations or trade-offs. There's cultural and relational trade-offs to be considered, especially in schools, which sort of promote themselves as human-centered institutions. And so I think just being very concrete, working through those scenarios that Tim laid out so well, and really making visible what the trade-offs are and what you're comfortable with is a way to, again, move towards that institutional vision and direction for any application of this technology.
Yeah, I love the idea of schools being very intentional instead of just getting caught up in the direction that the system moves. And yeah, what you were saying there, Eric, is also connected to another question we wanted to get at. Quite a few comments from people signing up for this Q&A session saying that there is growing resentment among students toward the adults and the ways in which they're using AI, feeling like their experience is either being shortchanged or there's a double standard. There's some potential for erosion of the relationships and the trust between the adults and the students in a school. That is setting off big alarms for me. That seems like something that should be taken very seriously. So would love to hear both of you, share whatever thoughts come up for you on that topic.
I mean, I could do 30 minutes on this, but like I guess I would recommend two books because I think AI at root presents a motivation challenge for schools. And so the two books I would recommend are 10 to 25 by David Yeager, which looks at the research on what motivates students to do things that are hard. And then The Students Are Watching by Ted and Nancy Sizer, which is about how students respond far more positively to implicit cues in school culture rather than explicit cues. In other words, students are watching what teachers do, and they are taking that as what the school truly stands for, regardless of what the school has articulated in any kind of policy or position statement, right? And David Yeager's book says that what motivates students to do things that are hard is a sense of status and respect from the people around them. And so I would say on this topic, and I've done focus groups with hundreds of high school students, on this topic of AI in school, students do not feel a sense of status and respect from adults. That is demotivating, right? They feel like they're being monitored, like they're being policed, and they also feel like their use of AI is being restricted while their teachers use it, however much the students perceive them to be using it, without seeming consequences. And like, look, these are adolescents, you have to take their perceptions with a grain of salt. But I think the bottom line is that the current dynamic on AI in most schools is not motivating to students. And over time, that can erode trust. And once you lose trust in a relationship, it is all, and research shows this, it's almost impossible to get back. And so I really am advising schools more strongly than I have before to pay attention to this issue of trust and to build more transparency into conversations about AI between teachers and students. Because in our concern or fear or anger or whatever it is about cheating, I think we're losing some other stuff in that too. And so I think it's really important that we kind of shift the tone of the conversation towards one where we can talk about this in a more open, transparent way, where we can build more psychological safety around this topic between teachers and students. I mean, I spent 2 days at a school last week just running hour-long facilitated dialogues over and over again between teachers and students, because the school is like, we have to change the dynamic on this topic. And I think it is like, if schools are going to set one goal for the next school year, I think it should be that, especially at the high school level. Like, how do you engage students in a more sort of respectful, open way on conversations about AI?
Thanks.
Yeah, Eric, I mean, I would love to just hear more about all of these conversations that you've had with high schoolers. And I can say that this is, I think, incredibly important even if it is a sort of cognitively completely different context for a teacher to say use AI. Like you could imagine a high school student might view it as hypocrisy. In some ways, it might not be, right? Like the purpose of the student, they're there to learn. For them to offload it to AI is a lot different than a teacher offloading their lesson plan. But as you point out, that's kind of irrelevant because for the relational component, it's all about trust and like how adolescents are perceiving it. And right now, with a very adversarial stance, I feel like it is degrading trust. You see this in undergrad as well. I mean, this is not, this is, a continuation of the same phenomenon. But I think the problem is the solution that gets put is transparency. And transparency is good. But right now, the social norms around AI use are confusing. They're not only shifting, but there's a lot of stigma. And so there's a lot of incentives that cause people to conceal or think they're concealing its use. And people can pick up on it. But then if you disclose, your work is thought of as is viewed as having less value or being less valid. So individual teachers are stuck in a very unfortunate position where they're being asked to take a social risk, right? That the larger system should be absorbing for them. There should be, from the top down, some conversations around what is an appropriate and okay, like a normative, what is normatively okay for teachers to kind of do. And that might not be everything teachers want to do, but how can we create a culture where AI is being used, where transparency doesn't come necessarily with punishment, but at the same time, there are some limits on what even teachers do with it to protect the relationship, which I think is extremely valuable in the long run.
And I think that's all students want, right? Most students I talk with, they get that teachers probably get to follow different rules than they get to follow. I think that their perception is that there are no rules for teachers and there's way too many rules for students, right? And so I think there's some middle ground to be found there. And I think that opportunity is just like the kind of this idea that maybe instead of policy that we deliver in classrooms, we can come to some kind of agreements. Like we can agree as teachers and students on co-constructed guidelines. And maybe that happens at the institutional level, maybe that happens at the classroom level. I'm kind of agnostic at this point around where that happens. But the idea that we begin the conversation by saying, this is a very powerful tool that has positive and negative applications. And let's agree that certain uses are off limits for both teachers and students. And let's agree that certain applications are permissible so long as we disclose. And I think that even just that step of involving students in the process builds that transparency and builds that trust.
And I'll say, Eric, this was in higher education, but when ChatGPT was newer in early 2023, I believe, that's what I did in my classes. So I had a survey that I had the students take to just assess their comfort levels for various uses of AI by themselves and by professors. And then I presented the results of that to the class, and I drew up a policy and had them suggest amendments, and then eventually we all signed off on it. And that was like our policy for the semester. That worked. It does get more complicated because there are, as I mentioned earlier, there are larger moral and political forces that have to do with AI. And so you also tend to get, at least in higher education, very bimodal or different distributions. There are some people that they don't converge towards an average. It's polarized a little bit. So I do think it can be complex. That was a toy method that I used. So I would love to hear and understand how you could, operationalize that in this environment. I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah, I don't have a great answer to that either. I mean, I think, something that happened to me in one of those teacher-student dialogues I did a while ago was like, a teacher was saying to students, I feel really bad that now whenever I get work from you all, I feel suspicious, right? Like then the teacher was like, I feel that like really makes me want to leave the profession. Like she was being very open with the students, right? And a student, to his credit, responded, do you know what also feels bad? Being suspected. And I think that that is the dynamic that I would like to change. Imperfect, perfect, whatever. Like I do think I agree with you. There's external forces and things that are bigger than us, but I do think the status quo at most schools I go to probably should shift that dynamic in some way, shape, or form. And we can start by the school institutionally, maybe articulating some non-negotiables, like what are the things that they're willing to really enforce, like teachers using AI to grade, students using AI to write, like whatever it is. But from there, I do think in the long term, it's going to end up that classroom dynamic is going to be where teachers and students really hash out a lot of these things.
Nice. I'm noticing the time. I am incredibly grateful. I really, really appreciate all the points that you're both sharing. I think a lot of perspectives that deserve some more attention than they're getting right now. So just want to say thanks again. Really, really appreciate your time. Um, and oh yeah, we've got yeah, thanks is good. I'll just keep saying thanks. Eric and Tim are amazing. We'll be sending out an email to everybody, whether you're here live or not, with the recording, with some links to Eric and Tim's Substacks so that you can subscribe if you haven't already. And we've got a couple of things coming up that might be of interest to people who are in here right now. One, I have been facilitating a community of practice for educators who want to, on a monthly basis, have conversations like the one that we were having today. So if you're interested in that for next academic year, you can click on the link or scan the code there. And then we also are going to be Mira and I are running a summer AI accelerator. So whether you are an administrator thinking about your school, your division, middle thinking about your department, or a classroom teacher, if you are needing some support moving from feeling overwhelmed to having a really concrete plan that you can put in place during the next school year, we've got a series of meetings over the summer where we can provide some support and walk you through the process of building a little roadmap. So again, feel free to click or scan there. Again, just want to say a huge thanks, Eric, Tim. Really, really appreciate your time today. And I hope people will keep an eye on everything that you continue to write on these topics.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. All right.
Have a good day, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care.